I had just said goodbye to my dying brother. The doctors told me there was nothing left to do, his kidney was failing, and I wasn't a match. I walked out of the hospital heartbroken and stopped for coffee. That's when I saw it, his face, in a magazine. A stranger, a CEO from another state. But he looked exactly like my brother. My name is Ethan, and what happened next would lead me down a road I never expected, through secrets, a lost past, and a miracle that saved his life. This is our story. Vanderbilt University Medical Center stood unnervingly quiet that morning. The air felt unusually still, almost respectful, as if the world outside the ICU knew what I was about to face. I sat on a cold wooden bench near the automatic doors, hands clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. My palms were damp with sweat despite the chilly air conditioning that never seemed to stop humming in this place. My name is Ethan Reed. I am 34 years old, a software engineer by trade, but right now none of that mattered. All that mattered was behind that wall in a sterile hospital bed, He wasn't my brother, not in the way most people think of brothers. We met when we were kids at Briarwood Home for Children, a cramped, underfunded orphanage tucked behind a faded Baptist church in the outskirts of Knoxville. I was 8. Daniel was barely 3, a quiet boy with tangled blonde curls and eyes that followed me everywhere. He clung to me like I was a raft in the middle of a storm. And in a way, I guess I was. We shared meals, stories, the occasional candy bar stolen from a careless volunteer's purse. We had nothing, no last names, no parents coming back for us. But we had each other. That was enough, until the day it wasn't. A couple from Virginia took interest in me. I was 10 then. I still remember the interview room where they asked about my favorite books, my dreams, what I wanted to be. I said I wanted to be a superhero. The wife smiled and said, "How about a software developer instead?" The husband laughed. I laughed too. I didn't even know what that was. The day I left, Daniel screamed so loud the social worker had to pry him from my leg. I didn't get to say goodbye properly. They told me it was better that way. Cleaner. 15 years passed. I went to college, got a job in tech, moved to Portland. Built a life that looked normal on paper. I had friends, a serious girlfriend named Kara. A loft apartment, a dog. But something always felt unfinished. One evening, while scrolling Reddit half awake in bed, I saw a post in a thread about adoption reunions. A photo caught my eye. A blurry image of a boy, maybe 10 or 11, holding a toy dinosaur. The caption read, "Looking for my brother Ethan. Lived in Briarwood in the early 2000s. Last saw him at age 10. I remember he used to fix broken radios. I remember he used to read to me at night." My heart stopped. That was me. The broken radios. The nightly stories. It had to be. I messaged the poster. He responded in less than 5 minutes. Daniel. It was really him. We met 2 months later in Nashville, halfway between our cities. I remembered him as a toddler. Now he was a grown man, tall, athletic, soft-spoken. But when he hugged me, I could still feel the little boy clinging to my leg. We became brothers again in every way that mattered. We spent holidays together, FaceTimed every week. He even visited Portland a few times. We were making up for time lost, or trying to. Then last fall, he collapsed during a hike outside Asheville. The ER ran tests. The diagnosis came swift and merciless. End-stage renal disease. Cause unknown. Maybe genetic, maybe just bad luck. Either way, his kidneys were shutting down. Now, 6 months later, I sat outside his ICU room watching nurses in blue scrubs walk by like nothing was wrong. The world kept turning even while mine had screeched to a halt. The doctor finally approached. He was in his early 50s, kind eyes behind smudged glasses, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reed," he said, "we've done everything we can medically. Daniel's at the final stage. He needs a kidney transplant. Without it, I'm afraid we're looking at days, maybe a week if we're lucky." I stared at him. The words didn't make sense at first. Days, a week. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. "Can I be tested?" I asked. "I want to donate. I have to." "Of course," he said. "We'll start immediately, but Ethan, you should be prepared. Matching isn't just about blood type. Compatibility is complex. Sometimes even siblings aren't matches." "I know," I said, "but I still have to try." And I did. Bloodwork CT scans the full panel. 2 days of needles in waiting rooms and sleepless nights. The result came back the next morning. I wasn't a match. "I'm so sorry," the coordinator said gently. "You have a different antigen profile. It would be too risky." I nodded again. That was all I seemed capable of. Nodding, I went back to Daniel's room. He was sedated, pale against the white pillows with tubes running into both arms. The monitor beeped steadily but too slowly. I sat down beside him and took his hand. It was cold. "Hey," I said softly. "I'm still here. We'll figure this out, okay? I promise." He didn't move. Outside, the sun peeked through the gray sky for the first time all day. But I didn't feel any warmth, only the heavy weight of time slipping away. At least, I did then. Everything else stopped. My startup, my calendar, my girlfriend's growing impatience. None of it mattered anymore. I canceled meetings, ignored deadlines, and left my inbox to drown. Kara called twice that first week. Then she stopped. I slept in the plastic recliner in Daniel's room, ate from vending machines and the volunteer-run soup cart outside the ER. The days blurred together, marked only by nurse rotations and lab reports. I learned which alarms meant what, how to interpret creatinine levels, how to keep my voice steady when I read him articles from his favorite outdoor magazine. He never opened his eyes, but I still read, still talked, still hoped. The transplant team had been kind, professional, thorough. They'd walked me through the compatibility tests like I was family, because to them I was. No one in that building questioned our bond. They didn't need to. It was written in the way I sat beside his bed every day and the way I flinched every time his monitor skipped a beat. When they told me I wasn't a match, it felt like the air left the room. Are you sure?" I asked, my voice paper thin. They nodded. Cross-match failed. Too many antibodies. It would be dangerous, even deadly. I stood outside the hospital afterward, hands jammed in my coat pockets, watching a delivery truck unload cases of paper towels. I remember thinking how stupid it was. People were dying inside and out here. Someone was arguing over a shipping invoice. Back in the ICU, Daniel's doctor met me again. "There's a regional registry," he said. "We'll put him on the list, but time isn't on our side." "How long?" I asked. "Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on availability and match. There's also paired exchange. You donate to someone else, they donate back, but that takes coordination, more time." I nodded, barely hearing him. Weeks, months. Daniel didn't have that. I went home that night for the first time in 9 days. My apartment smelled like takeout and loneliness. The dog stared at me like I was a stranger. I showered, changed, packed a bag, and drove back to the hospital before sunrise. I tried everything after that: online forums, donor networks, Reddit threads. I posted his story everywhere with photos and pleas and a link to the transplant center. Most people were kind. Some offered prayers. A few trolls said it was fake. One woman from Arizona got tested but wasn't a match. Each night I sat by his bed and watched the sun set through the narrow window. Nurses changed his sheets. Machines hummed. And I waited. There was a kind of madness to it. hoping, believing, refusing to leave, and maybe deep down fearing I already had once. He was my brother. That was all there was to it. We didn't need matching chromosomes to prove that, and if the world thought otherwise, screw the world, I just needed time. A miracle or both. But I was running out of both, and Daniel, he was running out of time. The ICU was silent save for the soft, rhythmic beeping and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum. It was nearly midnight. I had just finished reading another chapter from his favorite book, my voice low and steady, trying to mask the dread in my chest. I was about to pull the thin hospital blanket higher over his chest when I heard him murmur. It was faint, barely a whisper, but I caught it. When I was little, I think I had a brother. He used to take me out for burgers. Then he was gone. I can't remember his face. I froze. Daniel's eyes didn't open. His voice dissolved into the mechanical hum of the machines. He was still sedated, lost in whatever dreamscape the morphine had carved out, but the words stayed with me. I sat back down, staring at him in the dim light. I wanted to believe it was just a hallucination, a byproduct of the medication. But something about his tone, the weight behind it, it didn't feel imagined. A brother. It wasn't me. He wasn't talking about me. That realization hit like a slap. I thought I knew everything about Daniel's past. We'd shared so much over the years. But the early years, the years before Briarwood, had always been hazy for him. He said he didn't remember much, just flashes, sounds, shadows. Now, maybe this was one of them. I sat there for another hour, the nurse checking vitals beside me, saying nothing. Just watching Daniel breathe, my mind turning over that whisper like a stone in my palm. A brother who bought him burgers, who vanished, who he couldn't remember. The next morning I asked one of the nurses if Daniel had ever mentioned siblings in his intake paperwork. She checked but shook her head. No record of any known relatives. Still, I couldn't let it go. What if it was real? What if someone out there, someone who had once held Daniel's tiny hand, was still alive? And what if they could save him? I didn't know where to start, but for the first time in days I had something more than grief. I had a question, and maybe, just maybe, it would lead to an answer. I stopped at the hospital lobby cafe to grab coffee and something vaguely resembling breakfast. The barista handed me a lukewarm latte and a copy of Forbes left behind on the counter. I almost tossed it back, but something on the cover caught my eye. It was a photo of a man in his mid-30s wearing a navy suit standing in front of a forested background. Luke Harmon. It read in bold across the bottom. CEO of Timberline Industries. A feature on sustainable forestry. I froze. It wasn't the name. It was the face. The curve of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, the slightly tilted smile that looked like it never fully committed to joy, they mirrored Daniel's too closely. It was like looking at an older version of him in a parallel universe. I stood there, coffee forgotten in my hand, heart pounding. The story Daniel told me kept looping in my mind, the one he whispered half-conscious. A brother who used to take him out for burgers. And now here was this stranger smiling out from the glossy pages of a magazine. I sat down in the nearest chair and flipped through the article. Luke Harmon grew up in East Tennessee. Foster system, founded his company at 25, self-made, reclusive, no mention of siblings, East Tennessee. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and searched his name. Found a company profile, some interviews. One local news story from a few years back mentioned that he had briefly lived in a foster home in a town just outside Johnson City. Johnson City. That was less than 30 miles from where Daniel was born. I felt like the ground was tilting under me. Could it really be this simple? Could I have stumbled across someone who might be his family by sheer accident? I didn't believe in fate. But this felt like more than coincidence. Back in Daniel's room, I stared at him sleeping pale and quiet under layers of tubing and machines. I held up the magazine next to his face. I needed someone else to see it. I called a nurse over. "Doesn't he look like this guy?" I asked. She tilted her head, studied the photo, then glanced at Daniel. "Yeah, actually. That's kind of eerie." That was all I needed. The next day, I reached out to Timberline Industries through every public contact form I could find. No reply. I tried LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Nothing. I called the company pretending to be a reporter. Got rerouted 3 times before someone said Mr. Harmon doesn't take unsolicited calls. I wasn't giving up. It took me 2 days and a dozen dead ends before I found a blog post by a forestry student who interned at Timberline. She mentioned a bar in Knoxville that Harmon visited occasionally when he came back to check on one of the mills. I drove 3 hours that night, parked outside that bar, and waited. 3 nights later, he showed up. I recognized him instantly. Tall, lean eyes scanning the room like he never fully trusted it. I approached slowly, heart hammering. "Mr. Harmon," I asked. He looked up, guarded. "Yeah, my name is Ethan Reed. I think you might be my brother's brother." He blinked. I told him about Daniel, about Briarwood, about the whisper in the ICU. I showed him a photo from my phone. He stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down. He didn't say anything at first, just looked like someone had punched the wind out of him. "I used to have a little brother," he said finally. "When I was 7, we got separated in the system. I looked for him for years, but records were sealed, agencies closed. After a while, I stopped." He rubbed his face with both hands. "He used to love burgers, wouldn't eat anything else. He cried when Mom died. I held his hand at the funeral. Then, nothing." I nodded. "That's him." Luke swallowed hard. "Where is he?" "Vanderbilt Medical Center. He needs a kidney." He didn't hesitate. "Let's go." I don't know what I expected. Denial, maybe. Shock. But Luke was already moving, calling someone to cancel meetings, grabbing his coat. We drove in silence. Nashville lights blurred past the windshield. My hands trembled on the wheel. At the hospital, he walked into the room and stood at the foot of Daniel's bed, his eyes filled with tears. "It's him," he whispered. He didn't need a DNA test. He knew. We both did. Luke's face went slack as he gazed at Daniel, and then the dam broke. He sank to his knees beside the hospital bed, hands gripping the sheets of his brother until his knuckles turned white. Salty tears spilled down his cheeks. It wasn't just grief, it was something deeper. Older, a flood of regret and broken memories his body could no longer hold back. "I thought I'd never see him again," he whispered, voice raw. His chin trembled. He started talking, then not to me, not to anyone, but into the quiet, into all that he had lost and never knew he'd find again. I listened, stunned, my hand on his shoulder. "I don't remember much," he said between labored breaths, "but I remember Mom singing to us in the kitchen. I remember how she'd hum that lullaby while we washed dishes. And I remember holding Daniel's hand and thinking nothing in the world could break us." He coughed, gasping for control. When she died, everything changed. Dad started drinking. I blacked out most of that summer. One day, social services came and took us away. They gave me to a family in Lexington, said I was lucky, that I'd have a good life. And I did good school, college, business school, a name for myself. But Daniel, he was supposed to come too. He held my gaze and pain twisted his eyes. We were 7 when that happened. I never got to say goodbye. I reached out quietly. I did everything I could. I added because it all felt so heavy, the room so small. He nodded, tears still flowing. I wrote letters to every number on that address card they gave me. I checked foster home records, even drove back at 19, knocked on doors near Johnson City. I posted on forums, Facebook message groups. I found people who remembered him, said he loved burgers, fast food, ketchup on everything. But he was moved around so much they lost him. He paused and the machines beeped softly. Then you stopped looking, I said quietly. I had to. I got a life. I thought I was responsible somehow. If I hadn't left, would things have been different? Luke pulled his hand from the bed and tangled his fingers in his hair. I wish I had never left. That line hit so hard I didn't know what to say. Then so nearly imperceptibly he exhaled. And there you are. The moment was so heavy and beautiful it echoed. Two brothers who had gone their separate ways for 15 years finally found each other. I held my breath. Everything felt possible again. I think that's you, as he nodded toward Daniel. He looked so small here. But for the first time in a very long time, something bloomed in Luke's eyes, hope. We need to know if I began. He flinched. Can you donate? I asked, voice tight. He inhaled. Yes, I want to. I arranged it right away. Blood tests, physicals. I'd walk 1,000 miles for Daniel. We both would. We waited. I paced the hallways outside the lab. My stomach was a dead weight of fear. He'd give anything to save him. When the coordinator finally found us breath-catching, I watched Luke stand. The woman gave him a folder. I'm sorry, she said. His eyes went blank. He glanced at me. I'm not a match. No compatibility. Too much risk, she said gently. Luke's legs shook. He dropped back into a chair. I closed my eyes, felt my heart fracture. He held his brother's hand in the ICU, tears falling silently on sterile sheets. Hope had come in like an angel, and now it slipped away just as quietly, but Luke stayed. He sat with me, holding on, refusing to let go, not of Daniel, not of what they had rediscovered in each other. Because two brothers had found each other again. And that truth stayed. Even voice hadn't held the cure. We just couldn't stop holding on. Luke sat in silence beside the bed, eyes fixed on Daniel's still form. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors blended with the hum of the ventilator, forming a steady backdrop to his memories he had pushed far away until now. He pressed his hand against Daniel's as if trying to keep him tethered to the present. I used to think my memories would heal me, Luke said softly, voice thick with emotion. But now they haunt me like ghosts. I leaned closer, letting him speak. He closed his eyes and inhaled sharply. Mom died when we were very young. He paused, swallowing past a lump in his throat. Maybe 7, I can't be sure. What I do know is the pain was sharp like a knife twisted in your heart. He met my gaze for a moment before looking down again. Dad fell apart after that. He met that woman. I don't even know her name. They moved in together and she made him do what had to be done. She said we were too much, that we'd ruin his chances to be someone in the world. He swallowed hard, calming his voice. So he took us to the orphanage, just dropped us there like we meant nothing, and then he disappeared from our lives. It had been years since my own childhood stories felt so vivid. I could almost see the phantom of Luke's mother humming in their kitchen, feel the emptiness when she was gone, sense the sense of betrayal that carved a silent wound in him. I'm sorry, I said, voice hushed. That shouldn't have happened. Luke didn't respond for a moment, then he exhaled. I was placed with a middle-class family outside Lexington, Kentucky. They gave me a last name, a healthy body, a good school, but Daniel, he didn't get on that bus. He stayed at Briarwood. I thought I'd see him again. I've spent every year since looking. He paused, memories surfacing in his eyes. I wrote letters, made phone calls, pieced through social worker reports. I wrote to every agency in Tennessee, every foster home I could find. I tracked online records, read forums from people who'd grown up in the same system. All dead ends. Sometimes I wondered if he was alive or if I was chasing sand. I squeezed his hand. Now you're not alone anymore. He nodded, shifting slightly toward Daniel. I never thought I'd get to explain. Show him he wasn't forgotten, that I never forgot him. He exhaled a shaky breath. Then he went quiet, slipping back into his thoughts. We sat there until the early afternoon. I couldn't speak. The weight of guilt and longing between us was raw and palpable. Later, as evening shadow crept into the room, Luke looked at me. There's something I need to do. I need to find Dad. I felt my heart stall. He looked pale with resolve. I stopped looking years ago, but maybe this is the only way to give Daniel a chance. I nodded, swallowing my fear. His face crumpled again. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too, I said. He closed his eyes. But I can't watch him die without trying. That night I stayed with him in the hallway. Luke held his brother's hand through my shift, and I stayed afraid to leave. It felt like the past and present had collided, forcing us to choose between our broken memories and the fragile hope we had now. Luke quietly made a plan to look for Dad. Gather paperwork, contact people, push through any legal roadblocks. If Thomas Carter is out there, he said simply, we have to find him. I nodded into darkness. Tomorrow we start digging, and for the first time in a long while, this fight felt bigger than fear. Luke barely spoke for days afterward. I'd say his name and he'd nod without looking up. The hospital corridors felt longer, the nights colder. He carried something heavy, more than regret. Something broken. I watched him from the doorway, knocking once, then leaving him in silence. We just couldn't stop holding on. That had felt cathartic, but healing demanded more. One night I woke to find the hallway empty. I stepped out, shuffling softly in socks, and saw Luke already halfway across the pedestrian bridge that arched above the access road. It was past midnight, the city lights of Nashville twinkling, and I followed him. He paused under the harsh glare of street lamps, shoulders hunched, staring at fog drifting across the road below. He looked older, shadows etched across his cheeks. I didn't speak. After a long moment, he said quietly, I hate him. It spilled out raw. I hated him too, except I knew I hated the choice, the cowardice to walk away. He leaned against the railing. He left us. He erased us. I nodded. But now we need him. He didn't answer. We stood together, night wind in our faces, and he started talking again. I remembered how Dan would make me laugh by tracing perfect circles in the back of my hand with his thumb. I remembered how his laugh filled the room. I remembered him shivering with fear when we ran out of milk on mornings I wasn't there. He was so little, so fragile. I never thought I'd never think I'd have to choose between pride and saving him. Luke rubbed his temples. I've thought about it every day. Revenge, let him feel what it was like to lose me, or go to him, ask for help, humble myself. He closed his eyes. That's what I'm doing now. I exhaled. So was I. We stood there in silence, the city humming below. Next morning, Luke didn't tell Ethan. He hurried through breakfast clad in a coat that had seen better days. He piled documents into a weathered leather briefcase, fogged adoption files, court documents, his old address, a newspaper article mentioning Thomas Carter. He tucked in a copy of Daniel's hospital ID. He looked at me. Let's go. We drove down I-40 toward eastern Tennessee, radio muted, our thoughts speaking in echoes. Sunlight cracked the horizon, though our heads still felt heavy with night. I watched Luke's hands grip the steering wheel, knuckles white again. He's scared, I thought, but also resolute. We arrived in a small town that could have been forgotten. A rusted mailbox leaned by a clapboard house. I parked the SUV behind thick hedges. Luke swallowed. I'll do it. Today. He stepped out unsteady but determined. I followed him across a narrow lawn. The house was empty, boarded windows, overgrown lawn. No life inside, just dust and echoing floorboards. He stood in the doorway, trembling. He wanted to scream, to cry, to brand those years in Thomas's memory. But all he did was whisper, "Dad," silence. He stepped back out. He lowered his eyes. "Maybe it's gone," he murmured. We turned to leave. Then he stopped and ran back inside. I found him in what looked like a hallway. Pale light filtering through boarded windows. He held a black and white photograph. A woman he didn't know, sweetest smile. A man behind her. 2 boys in the front, almost. Maybe we're those boys. He slid to the floor, photo crumpled in one hand. Tears falling silent in streaks. I knelt and put a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to sit with it," I said. He nodded, voice a choked whisper. "I came to ask for help, but I found pieces, and I'm still broken. But I can try." The house stayed quiet, abandoned, mourning with him. Eventually he stood. He folded the photo carefully. "Let's go back, please." I helped him up. We left without looking back. He didn't say it, but he had chosen forgiveness over punishment. Not because he'd forgotten, but because he'd risked everything to save a life that mattered more. Back in Nashville, he walked into the ICU room and sat by Daniel's bed, same as before, but different. This time he looked like someone renewed, fragile, but whole. He didn't say it to me, but I heard it. "I've forgiven," he didn't say. "But I will save you anyway." And in that moment I believed him. Kentucky roads at dawn seem endless and haunted. We drove west out of Nashville, crossing state lines into rolling farmland and hollow hollows, where the air tastes like coal and regret. Luke's knuckles were white about the steering wheel. He hadn't said a word since we crossed into the state his father disappeared to. This is his home now, I thought. We hugged the shoulders of narrow lanes until we reached a tin-roofed workshop parked behind a crumbling farmhouse in a sleepy hamlet near Beattyville. The sign read Carter Mechanic Service. Farming implements rusted and broken lay scattered like memories needing repair. Luke's heart pounded as he pulled the truck in. He stayed in the cab for a moment, breathing deeply. Then he stepped down. Inside, Thomas Carter looked older than his years. Hands thick, skin weathered from field and machine, eyes dull with years of avoidance. He was bent over a counter, wiping grease from his hands when the bell above the door rang. He jumped, instinct flickering in his eyes. Luke stepped forward. "Hi, Dad," he said. Silence. Thomas's face paled. His chest rose and fell as if he couldn't decide whether to flee or collapse. Luke's voice cracked then. "It's me, Dad. It's Luke." Thomas turned fully, lips parted, and something broke inside him. He fell into a nearby stool, head in his hands. Luke said, voice trembling. "I came for Daniel." Thomas's breath hissed. Luke stepped closer, tears under curdled dread. "No one needs you to fix the past," he said quietly, hoarse with grief. "But you owe him a life." Thomas wept then, silent, broken. Thomas married shortly after Luke was taken away. His wife Margaret, a stern woman from these parts, stood at the edge of the workshop, face hard as stone. When Margaret heard Luke's name, she stared at him coldly. "You're not welcome here," she said. Thomas looked torn. He looked at me then, and there was raw pleading. Margaret's voice rose. "After what he did to you two, after the life he built, you expect him to come back to ruin me too." Luke's fists clenched. "No one asked for forgiveness," he said quietly. "But Daniel needs a life more than anyone needs vengeance." Margaret's mouth trembled. She looked at the ground. Thomas pounded a respirated breath out. "Luke," he whispered, I can't." Luke shook his head. "You don't have to earn forgiveness. Just help him." Thomas stared at the floor. Then he rose unsteadily, wiped his face, and nodded. Days later, I met him at the lab. He wore a plaid shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I'll do it," he said. "I'll test." The drive back was silent, the tension loosening slightly, faded under the weight of earnest hope. In the hospital the next morning, I watched Thomas sit beside Daniel's bed. The machine beeps and bland fluorescent lights couldn't mask the tremor in his shoulders. Then the coordinator came for the results. She looked at Thomas, then at me. "He's a match." Luke and I both exhaled. I watched Thomas close his eyes and finally let tears fall. He exhaled through his mouth. For the first time, he was choosing family over fear, legacy over regret. They scheduled the surgery for the next morning. Thomas was calm, then calm enough to step into the OR and save the child he abandoned. Chandler, the head nurse, caught my shoulder. "He did it," she whispered. "Yes, he finally did." All of us waited. The hours ticked by like stones falling. When the surgeon emerged tired but calm, I saw Daniel's levels stable on the monitor. Thomas had made it through. Luke followed him back to the waiting area. I held my breath. Luke watched his father wobble into consciousness. I think of it now as the moment the past softened enough to allow the future in. Thomas's eyes flickered open in ICU later. Daniel was resting beside him, tube-free, breathing steady. He reached out and found Luke's hand. He squeezed it and looked toward the bed. He mouthed, "Sorry." Luke nodded with so much calm in his face it felt like a benediction. Time didn't erase what happened, but Thomas showed a man could choose different. Luke sat there finally at peace while keeping his brother alive. That night I thought I saw wicked pride shatter into hope, and that felt like everything. The surgical wing smelled like antiseptic and fear. I sat between Luke and the wall, hands clenched in my lap, trying not to stare at the clock above the nurse's station. Every tick echoed like a warning. Somewhere beyond those double doors, two men I had come to care for deeply were being cut open so one could live and the other could atone. Luke hadn't spoken much. He just kept staring straight ahead, arms crossed, jaw tight. His foot tapped out an anxious rhythm on the tile. Every time a nurse passed, both of us looked up, hoping. After nearly 5 hours, a surgeon stepped through the doors. We stood before she even said a word. "Daniel's surgery went well," she said. "The kidney is functioning. He's stable. We'll keep him under for a bit longer, but so far, so good." I sank into my chair, exhaling for what felt like the first time all day. "And Thomas?" Luke asked. The surgeon hesitated. There was a reaction during the transfusion. Anaphylaxis. We managed to stabilize him, but he's in the ICU now. Unconscious. Luke's face fell, like a punch landed where he didn't expect one. "How bad is it?" he asked. "We don't know yet. He's being monitored. We'll keep you updated." When she left, Luke sat down hard. His hands trembled now. The stoicism cracked. "He saved Daniel," I said softly. Luke nodded but didn't speak. We went up to see Daniel first. He looked pale but better than I'd seen him in weeks. His breathing was easy, his vitals strong. I sat beside him, my hand on his. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel the sting of helplessness. He made it. Somehow, through all the impossibilities, he made it. I turned to Luke. "Want to see your dad?" He shook his head. "Not yet." I understood. It was hard to face a man who just gave everything when you'd spent your life building a wall to keep him out. A few hours later, Daniel began to stir. His fingers moved. His eyelids fluttered. When his eyes finally opened, they were glassy but aware. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, leaning in. He blinked, looking around slowly. "Hospital," he rasped. "Yeah, you made it through. Surgery's done. You've got a brand new kidney." His brow furrowed. "Who?" I glanced at Luke, who had finally walked in. "It was your dad," Luke said. "Thomas." Daniel stared at him. "Our dad," Luke nodded. "He's here." Luke hesitated. "He is. He's in ICU. There were some complications." Daniel didn't say anything, just stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly. "Is he going to die?" he asked. "We don't know," Luke said, "but he saved your life." Daniel turned his head toward the window. His face was unreadable. We let him rest. Later, Luke and I walked to the ICU together. Thomas lay in a dimly lit room, a respirator hissing quietly beside him. He looked older than before, more fragile. The man who had walked into that operating room full of purpose was now somewhere unreachable. Luke stood by the bed, looking down. "I hated you for so long," he said softly. "For leaving us, for choosing someone else, for not fighting harder." He touched the bed rail. "But you came back. You showed up, and maybe that's what matters now." The machines beeped steadily. No change, no sign. We stayed until the nurses asked us to leave. Over the next few days, Daniel improved quickly. The doctors were impressed. His body was responding well. He was strong, stubborn, fighting to live like he always had. But Thomas didn't wake up. One afternoon, a nurse came to find us. "You should come," she said. We walked to the ICU in silence. Thomas looked the same, pale, still. Then his fingers twitched. Luke moved closer. Dad Thomas's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He looked confused at first, disoriented. His eyes scanned the room, settled on Luke. "You're here," he whispered. Luke nodded. "You made it," barely, Thomas said with a weak smile. "Where's Daniel? He's okay. He's gonna be okay." Thomas's lips trembled. "Good." He reached out with effort. Luke took his hand. "I didn't know how to come back," Thomas said, "but I wanted to." "You did," Luke whispered. They stayed like that for a while, father and son connected finally, without anger or excuse. And when Thomas drifted back into sleep, it wasn't the kind of sleep that came with tubes and worry. It was the kind that looked like peace. The price had been steep. But maybe redemption always is. The price they paid had been unthinkable, but somehow redemption felt within reach. In the quiet hum of the ICU, I watched as Thomas's eyes fluttered open just long enough for a final message. His voice was faint, rasping through the dryness in his throat, but we heard every word. "I made the wrong choice. But at least this time, I didn't walk away." Luke didn't say anything. He just reached out and held his father's hand. No anger, no accusations, just a grip that said more than any sentence ever could. Thomas smiled. It was small and tired and full of something like peace. Then his eyes closed and he didn't open them again. The machines continued their quiet work for a while longer, as if reluctant to accept the truth. Then the heart monitor slowed, then stilled. A soft, steady tone filled the room. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Thomas Carter was gone. We buried him in a quiet spot in the hills outside Somerset beneath an old oak tree. It was where he'd taken Luke fishing once, long before the world had turned upside down. Luke gave the eulogy. He didn't speak of the mistakes or the years lost. He spoke of one final act that mattered, of a man who came back not because he was asked, but because he finally chose to do the right thing. He didn't ask for forgiveness, Luke said. And maybe that's what made it real. I stood beside Daniel as we lowered the casket. His hand found mine. He was stronger now, clearer, alive, because of Thomas. We didn't owe the man our lives, but we owed him our thanks. Afterward, we returned to Nashville. Life didn't pause. The world kept turning. But something fundamental had shifted. Luke started coming around more often, not just as a visitor, but as a brother. Daniel began helping at the foundation they started together. I watched them rebuild what time and silence had broken. And sometimes, when no one was watching, I saw Luke staring out the window, a quiet look in his eyes. "You forgave him," I said once. Not in words, he replied, but I showed up. That's what forgiveness looks like now. I believed him. And in that moment, it was enough. Nashville's lights were soft when we finally moved into our new home. A modest place near East Park with enough room for 3 beds and a small office where Ethan typed lines of code almost daily. Daniel had his own space too, a corner filled with toys and books. Realness had returned to our lives in a slow, steady way that felt right. Daniel bloomed first. He was waking with a strength that surprised the doctors. Days after the surgery, he was sitting up, talking, cracking jokes, still tired but alive. I stayed close, watching him regain color in his cheeks. Laughter in his voice, a spark my heart had forgotten. A few days later, we launched True Roots Foundation. Luke signed the documents that registered it in Tennessee. Ethan built the website and matching software that would connect lost children with their families, using AI-driven genealogical tools. Daniel volunteered with local foster kids on Saturdays, reading to them, helping them draw family trees on construction paper. It felt like we were breathing life into something pure. The foundation grew faster than we expected. We started with just one small office above a coffee shop on 8th Avenue. Word spread first through local adoption forums and then a local NPR segment. Soon after, an afternoon television feature caught fire on social media. They called us the Brotherhood that saved itself. Donations streamed in small checks, handwritten notes, school fundraisers. Local businesses offered pro bono services. A tech meetup hosted a fundraising hackathon for our matching algorithm. Luke watched the donations flood in and quietly smiled as he updated the budget. Ethan emailed me about server upgrades late at night. Daniel invited kids from group homes to come for a storytelling hour. It became real. Not a bandage for our past, but a bridge to hundreds of broken beginnings. We held the first annual True Roots reunion at a community center in East Nashville. We brought a few families who had found each other back through our program. We cried at the first embrace when a boy found his biological father. We cheered when an older sister met the little brother she had always wondered about. Ethan streamed it online, our story reaching households that felt run away. I watched Luke and Daniel standing there together, stronger for each other. I felt something settle deep in my chest. Peace. Months later was Daniel's birthday. He turned 29. We hosted a small party in the backyard, balloons, homemade barbecue, laughter filling the yard. Daniel had insisted on one detail: cake. His favorite was chocolate fudge with sprinkles. On his face when we sang happy birthday, 3 brothers at a table, candles flickering. That smile meant everything. It was his first proper birthday with 2 brothers beside him, a family present instead of the echo he'd carried for so long. We didn't invite a photographer, no need. Some moments are just for those who share them. We danced to childhood songs, slipped old jokes back into the conversation. Wrapping a gift, I felt across to Luke and he nodded. We had built something born from pain, held together by love. We found a father who came home. We rescued a life. We created a foundation that helped others do the same. It ended simply. The nighttime sky settled, my brothers asleep inside. I sat outside and listened to nothing but the crickets. And that felt like enough. If this story moved you and you believe that every child deserves the chance to find belonging, please consider subscribing. We'll bring more stories from true roots, more hope, more beginnings restored.